Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon will seek resentencing for Lyle and Erik MENENDEZ in the 1989 murder of their parents, paving the way for their release decades after being locked up. For context, in 1989, the brothers fatally shot their mom and dad, Kitty and Jose Menendez, in their ritzy Beverly Hills home after they allegedly endured years of sexual and emotional abuse by their father, a music executive. Each was around 6 years old when the pattern of repeated abuse began. Lyle and Erik were 21 and 18 when they committed the grisly crime.
The brothers were sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole, but now D.A. Gascon wants them to be resentenced. Here he is in a Thursday press conference. Let's watch.
There are people in the office that strongly believe that the Menendez brothers should stay in prison the rest of their life, and they do not believe that they were molested. And there are people in the office that strongly believe that they should be released immediately and that they were in fact molested. I have to tell you that after a very careful review of all the arguments that were made for people on both sides of this equation, I came to a place where I believe that under the law, resentencing is appropriate.
According to a 2023 California law, people between 18 to 25 years old are allowed parole. The Menendezes were under 26 years of age when they killed their parents. Gascon filed a motion Thursday asking that Lyle and Erik be resentenced to 50 years to life, which would make them immediately eligible for parole if the judge grants it. The case recently resurfaced following the premiere of the Netflix series titled Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story. A hearing date has been set. I know you've watched the movie, I haven't, so please fill me in on the history of these two. I understand that they claim that they were being molested by their father and that their mother knew about it and didn't do anything, and eventually they snapped and murdered both of their parents.
Yes, so there's the series on Netflix. There's now a documentary on Netflix, which I haven't watched, but there's also a documentary on Hulu. And in the documentary on Hulu, I think what's important to note is this started to come to light because of some folks on TikTok who, it's kind of comical, they first discovered the Menendez brothers and like, oh, they're really good looking guys. Which is concerning, but that was the entry point, right?
Women love killers, apparently.
So they said they started to go down a rabbit hole, and it wasn't just women. There were some guys also who started to go down this rabbit hole and learning, re-educating themselves. Most of these people were not even alive when this happened, and they re-educated themselves about this case. Now the case was incredibly complicated. It happened around, well, it was 1989, so it was before the O.J. Simpson case, but later when they were tried again, because there were two court cases. So the first one led to a hung jury, right? And then the second one, when the DA's office tried, they went down much harder, sort of in reaction to the O.J. Simpson criticisms that district attorney's office had in Los Angeles at that time. If you remember, LA was the center of everything at the time. So in that second case, the defense did not release the information about the molestation until the final minutes, and only a teeny bit was allowed in. And in that testimony, if you were to watch, the sons were so clearly distraught. It is hard to watch their testimony and not understand what they were going through. And then they were sentenced. And so there was some conversation at the time, but it seemed to me that a lot of the mess was created by the legal system, the DA's office, and that's probably why Gascon said some people in the DA's office who might have been around in the 80s and the 90s did not agree with his decision, but then others did because of new evidence that's come out. Also new evidence, just to throw this out there, in another reality show about Menudo, if you remember that group, that
boy band,
yeah.
Was
Ricky Martin was in
yeah,
it.
Livin' La Vida Loca.
That's Ricky Martin.
Yeah.
So he came out of Menudo. So one of the boy band members, his name was Roy Rosselló. So he was one of the youngsters, and he actually claimed that he was molested by the Menendez father.
Really?
Because he was a music executive at the time.
Oh.
So that evidence is also brought into the equation, and it's been 35 years too. These folks have served their time, these boys. Not all of their family is happy, but the majority of them are happy that this could occur. And also the claim at the time, sorry, just to dump everything on you, is they were portraying them as wanting the money from their parents, but there's also some questions. Yes, they went on a spending spree, but there's also some questions as to whether or not they were spending outside of their normal spending habits because the family
Were
was
they
very
wealthy? Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, obviously it would have been hard to prove the molestation. It would sort of be like a he said, she said, but you would think that that would factor into the sentencing at least, even if not brought up during the trial. And I understand there's been some pushback on the Netflix series because apparently they kind of portray a sort of incestuous gay relationship
Yeah.
between the brothers that I don't know that there was ever evidence of.
And the adults, the brothers push back on that publicly. So I don't know where that was rooted in, where that came from, but essentially they were saying that the older brother had gone through so much torture, essentially, by their father, and that when he learned about his younger brother, which is true, he became very angry. But then they made it appear that the older brother was then molesting his younger brother, and there's no evidence of that, as far as we know.
I mean, which to be fair wouldn't be uncommon as a victim of abuse either. But I hear music executive working with young boys, red flags start going off. I mean, Lou Pearlman, of course. And then on the TV circuit, Dan Schneider, there was that recent Nickelodeon documentary about what those kids went through. I would say it wouldn't surprise me. I have watched some of their testimony, and it was very hard to watch. You could feel the emotion coming out of them. And I think another interesting facet of this is that this was one of the first big sort of celebrity trials, so to speak, one of the first that was really televised in a way where it captured the nation's attention. And then you have OJ starting right after this first hung jury trial. I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways this probably changed the way we even consume information about the judicial process.
And the second trial was not televised, so that was another factor. I mean, the judge made a lot of decisions that I think in retrospect in 2024 probably wouldn't be handled that way. The way that the public discussed this case, it's cringy. It's very cringy in 2024 to see the headlines and how comedians at the time were making fun of them. And, and there was some information about the molestation, especially in that second case, but it's sad to see how we as a society talked about sexual violence, molestation, and if you want to go even further, how women were portrayed in the 90s and 2000s. I think we're having a real aha moment in society.
Yeah, and it's weird. I mean, when you think about it, you hear people talk about, like, your daughter gets raped and you go and kill the guy that did it. Should you go to jail? And most people are like, no, that's justice, right? Mm-hmm. And I would tend to agree with that. And so I don't think that this case is functionally that different from sort of that mindset. And I know a lot of states are now implementing laws that actually give sentencing breaks to people who are victims of some type of domestic abuse or sexual violence, who then go on to be violent against the perpetrator. New Jersey and New York, I think, both have a law stating that if you are the victim of some kind of abuse, then you still have to serve some time for overreacting, so to speak, but you get a break because you were trying to basically defend yourself, even if it wasn't a self-defense in that exact moment.
It's like it's still intentional. There's still, it's manslaughter, right? But it's a different form because it's, there is a mental state at play here. If you're traumatized, if you're dealing with sexual violence for that long, repeatedly, and I highly recommend people watch the film and the documentaries because it's alarming, and equally so is just how our justice system dealt with the situation. It's like we didn't really fully understand humans at the time. Mm-hmm. I mean, someone who goes through that sort of trauma, of course, is going to react and be mentally affected by it.
Well, 30 years later, more than 30 years later, it looks like they will be getting out. That's going to do it for us today on Rising. As always, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you can get all of the content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.